offices. It was only set up last July, at the moment when we were finishing the discussion of our Law 227 on tax administration of transfer pricing. And this department was actually set up for this purpose. Today, this department has got three branches which deal with various agreement processes, with tax process and supervision of tax administration. And whenever we talk about tax administration, we may not escape the issue of international cooperation. And we could not hold this panel without inviting here various tax advisors. And we now have here the three major specialists in this field, who are the leading Russian specialists. We have people from Ernst & Young, Mikhail Orlov, and also, the last but not the least, we have Svetlana Straikova. She is partner of PHWC. And this is a panel. My name is Alexey Fedorchuk. I'm Deputy Director of Russia's Federal Tax Service. And we shall devote the next 2 hours to the issue of this tax administration problems. We decided when we discussed with the organizers how we're going to run this panel. We decided not to have a list of speakers. We just wanted to select some problems or issues which will be of interest to the participants of this panel, and we would like to discuss what would be further development of transfer prices oversight, and which problems may pop up and which problems we would like to discuss here at this panel. And naturally, I expect that there'll be active discussion from the floor, and that will only be to the benefit of this panel. Talking about the organization of our work, talking about transfer prices, I would like to mention the fact that probably we shall start up over that from the very beginning. That is, we are going to start with the principle of extended hand. This principle for Russian audience perhaps sounds not very attractive way, but we borrow it from the at arm's length for the English-speaking people. It's you can easily understand it, that you have to keep people at arm's length, at some distance, and in Russian you may have different interpretations of this term. Perhaps this is the market value of something, and from this point of view I would like to hear the trendsetters of the transfer prices, Mr. Wolfgang Büttner, and to start our panel to discuss it with the principle of arm's length. What does it mean actually, and what do you understand by that term? You are recognized, please, sir.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me? Okay. I don't have to repeat the Russian. It was not so good anyway because I don't speak Russian. So good morning, everybody. I'm very pleased to have been invited to this panel and to take part in an interesting discussion with the distinguished panel members. And I would just like to flag some issues and hope that we have an interesting discussion and get different views on the question of what does arm's length principle mean? Is there any difference between the arm's length price or profit and the market value? So what is the definition of the arm's length principle is my first point. The second is, does it mean we are modeling the conditions, or are we trying to find real deals, trying to find comparable third-party or independent party transactions? And as I said, is there a difference between the arm's length price or margin or the market value? When I was involved in commenting on the new Russian transfer pricing legislation, I saw that in the new law there is mention of market value, and you will not be surprised to know that many non-OECD member countries and even some member countries use the term market value or fair market value. Personally, I have a problem with the term fair market value because I have no idea how anyone can define what is fair and what is unfair. I think that is very judgmental. But I think this problem starts actually with what you see on the top left side of my screen. Two guys holding each other at arm's length. Now that is an American or English expression, but it does not mean anything in German, for example. Arm's length in German is very close. So we could not even use it in German. We would call this arm's length principle comparable independent party transaction. And also the French do not know what it means. So they had also to find a different wording. And they use in French, that is the other language I speak fairly well, prix de pleine concurrence, which means the price of full competition. And you see, if the English or if the OECD had used a different term, we might not even have all these problems. Now, the definition of the arm's length principle can be found in Article 9, paragraph 1 of the OECD Model Tax Convention, and it means nothing else than comparing the taxpayer's condition that is under examination, or the tested party, and condition meaning here the taxpayer's price or profit margin, taking into consideration all the other circumstances, with conditions of independent third parties in comparable transactions. And some people now try to find a definition of arm's length principle in the OECD transfer pricing guidelines, and they may look all the 372 pages, there is no definition. But there is a definition, by surprise, in the commentary to Article 9, paragraph 1 of the OECD Model Tax Convention, and even more surprising, it states, it is open market economic conditions. So that comes very close to market value. So one could easily conclude there is not much of a difference between arm's length principle and market value. Now, comparability, comparing the transactions of related parties, of associated enterprises with third parties, is at the cornerstone of the arm's length principle. And I was very pleased when I saw the Russian transfer pricing law that it includes now all the 5 OECD comparability factors, which means actually that not in all cases one has to use the market value, one has to use the value or the price that independent third parties would have agreed upon in comparable situations. So business strategies need to be taken into consideration, for example, specific features also of the product or the functions performed. But in practice, this may still not be very helpful because oftentimes there is no market for a specific product or for specific transactions. In particular, there are oftentimes no comparable third-party transactions when it comes to unique and valuable intangibles. For example, marketing intangibles. Just assume Coca-Cola Inc. in the United States is selling its utmost valuable brand name Coca-Cola to its subsidiary on the Bermuda Islands. Well, even PepsiCo is not a comparable trademark. At At least Coca-Cola would tell you that. They would say Coca-Cola is much more valuable. Now, does this mean we can not accept this transaction? We have to disregard this transaction as abusive? Well, of course not. But the problem is, how do we find the price if there is no market, if there is no comparable available? Well, one should look first, of course, for real deals, but if there are no real deals, like here in intangibles, one would, if not available, hypothesize what independent enterprises would have done. And I think this is one of the differences actually between the arm's length principle and market value, because market value may not help any further in cases where there is no market, where there is no comparable. And also, there may be differences in those cases where the arm's length principle would take specific conditions into account, like passive association or synergies. The price may be influenced just because the two enterprises that are associated use synergies, or they know all the information that on the market two unrelated parties would normally not have. There's normally in the market disparity of information available. And there's even one, I find, very interesting case, General Electric, Canada, which was about guarantee fees that were paid by one associated enterprise, and that was in a related party transaction, and the judgment of the Tax Court of Canada was, well, specific conditions need to be taken into consideration. One has to hypothesize how would independent parties under the same or similar conditions have dealt with such a case. Now I leave the floor open for...
Вы знаете, да.
You know what is interesting here is that the issues of transfer pricing, the way we inherited them here in Russia, these are the calc transfer from the guidelines on transfer pricing published by the OECD. And it's interesting to discuss the relationship between the international interpretation of arm's length and the Russian interpretation, and perhaps Dmitry Valerievich would say something. Good morning. About the principle of arm's length and legislation in general, let me share some of my thoughts on that issue. Talking about arm's length principle, we do not use it so far in our legislation, Russia's legislation. Therefore, we are trying only to explain this. To explain these terms, and in the specialized literature we have some Russian bred terms which would give you at least an idea what is meant by arm's length, and in the practical calculation of taxes, and how the principle of arm's length could be used and utilized, and how it is reflected in our legislation. It's Article 105. You have to read this article attentively, you have to understand it, and you have to read very carefully paragraph 2, where it is written about the limitation or constraints where this principle of transfer pricing or the principle of the logic of arm's length cannot be applied, when it could be it could lead to the reduction of tax payments and to reduction of tax revenues for the federal budget. And today we have, of course, to study different aspects and to study the work of our colleagues in foreign countries. So this is a principle which is widely used in the tax services of foreign countries, and it is practiced. if it should not be used or enforced in countries where it
So these are my basic thoughts concerning the principle. And as for the implementation, since we are at the legal forum, I believe the major difficulty and of the future development is exactly with that. How correctly and how precisely the legislators are able to transfer these notions into the legislation, because we are going to live following the law that we have today, following the law that for us, for taxpayers and for the tax authorities, is the sort of a guideline in many ways. And so we need to understand properly the word and the letter and the spirit of the law. Some specialists say that our code is unique in this particular respect because this detailed description of principles of approaches is not contained even in the legislations of other countries which have a lot of experience in transfer pricing. It is positive indeed because it protects the rights, particularly the rights of the taxpayers and tax authorities. But I believe at the same time that it's most difficult today to describe using the legal terms the notions of principal importance of and today we will discuss about this. We will talk about the market price, about the fair price, about the price for the purposes of taxation. So all the details contained in the legislation, as I say, do not always help to reach the ultimate goal set out by the legislators when they were drawing up the provisions of the law. So a lot will depend, of course, on the law enforcement, on how the taxpayers and the tax authorities interpret the law and understand it. And the future of this law, first of all, is in the hands of business. And the tax authorities must be most attentive to the signals that come from business, and they need to exercise treatment and interpretation in accordance with those. Thank you very much. And now, after talking about the arm's length principle, we come to understand once again that this legislation is quite unusual from the point of view of the traditional tax practices, because the OECD guidelines clearly stipulate that transfer pricing is far from being science. Transfer pricing emerges because and actually depends very much on how the professionals involved in transfer pricing, whether we're talking about taxpayers or the tax authorities, taxpayers who will have to report to the tax authorities. So a lot depends on how careful they are when collecting information, how reliable this information is. The sources they use play a significant role. The comparability principle is to be considered. The law describes the principle of comparability in a detailed way. Article 40 that you're all familiar with did not work in the past, and first of all simply because this particular article referred us to some official sources of information, and nobody knew what was meant by those official sources of information. Nobody ever bothered to explain what they were. And today the field is open. We can use nowadays any sources of information that are available, that are accessible, and in the market we can find numerous databases which can be acquired and which are being acquired, and the professionals rely on them very much and make use of them in a proper way. But again, a lot will depend on the particular databases used, on the sampling, on criteria of sampling, and finally definitely we will have different interpretations. Now, we can talk about the future, of course, but I suppose that our colleagues from Kazakhstan, Lydia, for example, could speak in a more detailed way about their approach and the comparability principle as they understand it. Being familiar with Kazakhstan's experience, I would like to ask you to describe the norms and the legislation in Kazakhstan referring to the sources of information. Thank you very much. Alexei, good morning, colleagues. First of all, I would like to thank the Federal Tax Authority of the Russian Federation for the invitation. Unfortunately, our top managers were unable to arrive today, and so I myself and my colleague are here to describe the experience of Kazakhstan. So in Kazakhstan, the control over and the supervision over the transfer pricing was started in 1995. In the year 2001, a separate law was adopted, and then starting with the year 2006, we began to work on the improvement of this particular sphere of work, and in the year 2008 a new law was enforced, and it was enforced actually on the 1st of January the year 2009, and it presents in a detailed way the supervision and control over the transfer pricing. The issue of comparability is difficult enough. In the Republic of Kazakhstan, we settle it in the following way. We have a separate list of official sources of information. Article 18 of our legislation on transfer pricing in Kazakhstan stipulates the possibility of using any information sources, but contrary to the Russian Federation legislation, we have a very clear-cut hierarchy of the sources. First of all, the officially recognized sources are to be put in use, and then the stock exchange authorized authorities data, then information provided by the transaction parties, and as for the officially recognized sources of information, these are approved. There is a list approved by the government of Kazakhstan. There is a special resolution dedicated to that, and this includes independent, well-known companies such as Thomson Reuters, Argus Media Limited, Platz, Megasoft, Canform, and other companies. Why is it that we are including many companies into this list? We came across a situation when the sources of information did not cover all the sales market, and in order to solve this particular problem, we decided to include a wider range of companies into the list, not to come across the problem of the lack of information. Of course, we mostly apply this list for the purpose of stock commodities and raw materials and different the types of commodities which are sold in connection with different exchange commodities and land, and there are separate lists for financial services. As for the comparability, the law stipulates 5 methods of the market price definition, and there is a quite clear-cut hierarchy. So in Kazakhstan, the method of the uncontrolled and comparable price is used. Other methods are used only when this particular first method cannot be applied. Of comparable uncontrolled price. Now, this method is applied using the method of internal comparability and external comparability. External comparability actually means that they're the prices of the exporters with the interrelated company are compared and independent parties' prices are compared. And if it is impossible to carry out the external comparison, then there is internal comparison when the exporter's price is compared with the price of an independent party. On the whole, we do not have that many disputes with the taxpayers because the practice is extensive, and we have already been able to find a common language, so to speak. We have arrived at a consensus, and in reality, we are much more involved in the monitoring of transactions rather than in the checking and auditing. So the taxpayers actually are able to carry out the adjustments themselves, and we have quite significant payments into the budget. So that's the Kazakhstan practice. Yes, you're welcome. Good morning, colleagues. I right away have a question. Well, first of all, I would like to say that I'm happy to see all of you within the framework of our roundtable discussion, and the topic of transfer pricing is a unique topic which is going to be extremely important for Russia over the next period of time. And here is my question in connection with what our colleague from Kazakhstan has just said. Now, we're still not even close at all to the situation when everything works perfectly between the tax authorities and the taxpayers. For us, it's something unimaginable at the point. But nonetheless, so you have those lists of information sources, and this makes it possible for business and for the state authorities to forecast the definition of the calculation of the market price. But are there any transactions in your country which, under normal conditions, when the companies are not interrelated, are not associated, do not have any sort of mutual contracts? So how do you define the transactions in this case from the point of view of the transfer? Let's take a borrowing agreement. A company gets $1 billion, for example, at a market interest rate, and the interests are not paid. The loan is not being paid back. The contract, the agreement is not extended. What do you do about that? Do you have any special provisions covering this situation? And maybe our colleagues from other countries can explain, well, what the situation is like in their states. How do we overcome this particular difficulty? Now, in reality, in Kazakhstan, as for services, we are carrying quite a lot of work. We are actually examining the situation, and control is mostly over commodities. So I really cannot share with you any positive experience in the particular field that you are interested in. I cannot. We have a working group of experts, and they have started the examination of this particular issue. So that's an important issue for us. We are coming across this particular situation, so we do not have any practical experience. I said our positive experience is associated with commodities. Svetlana, anything? Would you like to add a few words? Now the microphone works. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I would like to thank the Russian Federation for the invitation. It's a great honor for me to be present at the forum. And I would like to answer the question of our colleagues concerning the financial transactions between the interrelated companies. At present in Latvia, considering the practical experience of transfer pricing, it is one of the most often occurring situations, and this happens very often between interrelated companies, and most of the cases we have are cases associated with financial transactions. Now, under these circumstances, we follow the same principles that are presented in the OECD guidelines, and they are contained in the legislation of Latvia as well. But as we know, financial transactions allow the application of just the first method of the market price calculation of the transaction, contrary to the other type of transactions, for example, services or acquisition and sales. Well, in this particular context, we have to consider the analysis of the solvency and the credibility and the reliability of the borrower in order to calculate the market price of the transaction. In the audits, we follow the information provided by the companies, and certainly when the company does not have a proper type of cooperation with the tax authorities, then the only way for us to proceed is to follow the provisions, and in this case the calculation of the price is based on the economic reliability of the price, indeed, and we always have to consider whether this situation is possible at all in the open market. So the borrower's analysis is most important for us. So it happens quite often that the information concerning the financial status of the borrower is not available to the authorities, and so that means we have to request this information from the countries in which the partner is registered. Since financial information is publicly available information and it is contained in the annual reports, but cooperation with the countries which consider this information to be confidential makes this work quite difficult. So we have to rely on the information that we dispose of. And the interest rates are defined on the basis of the average statistical interest rate, which is in its turn defined on the basis of the transactions between banks and legal entities for long-term loans and short-term loans in specific currency at specific interest rates. And we certainly apply the interest rate, the average interest rate, for the time of the transaction. Well, obviously, the taxpayer, when disputing this, can rely on the procedures and can provide information concerning the partners during the following procedures. So for the tax authorities, there is always a risk in that. Well, thank you, Svetlana Nikolaevna. But we are back to the comparability, to the partial and complete comparability, because the quality of work depends very much on that. But we understand that there are no two absolutely comparable entities or transactions, and all the parties present here share this opinion. The only ideal situation, and OECD describes that, is the company. When the company sells the same type of commodity at the same type of prices and sells them to the interdependent and the independent entity. That's an ideal situation, and we come across it very rarely, hardly ever. So definitely there is a question of the comparability limits and what is considered to be sufficient for us to say that all the adjustments, all the possible adjustments have been made, and all these adjustments can be accepted, and the principle of sufficiency How does it work? Maybe Svetlana can start this discussion, and then I will ask Tatiana to continue with that.
Thank you for your question. I would like to say, first of all, big thanks for inviting me to this panel, and indeed it is devoted to a very interesting topic, urgent problem. We have a chance to exchange opinions among different countries and to see the experience of taxpayers and tax collectors. And of course, talking about comparability, we have, of course, to compare data and talking about Section 5 of our tax code. This is, of course, a section which is borrowed from international experience. But whatever we mention comparability, we should distinguish between the requirements of the first method, that is the method of comparability of the prevalent market's value, and there could be differences in the conditions of delivery, and very often we have to consider the conditions of the second party, and it is could be of very high importance, which would affect the final price. And by enumerating the different criteria of comparability, the tax code mentions that it is very critical for the first method, the market value, and we do not find ideal situations. We do not have ideal taxpayers, and the theory of transfer pricing, when we have to sell the commodities to a dependent entity or non-dependent entity, the situation becomes much more difficult. The taxpayer sees that it's very difficult to make some corrections, and nobody forces him to apply the first method. The law today provides for several options based on the analysis of profitability, and we have to use different options, because sometimes for a taxpayer who sells, for instance, electronic goods, no matter whether he sells TV with a screen of 20 inches or 50 inches, there is only a degree of comparability. Therefore, in this country, when we introduce these new principles into our legislation, and we introduce this principle of compatibility, but if the taxpayer sees that it is much more easier for him to explain his principle of tax payments based on the principle of profitability, it's much easier and more profitable for him. And then we may use other options if we have unique products, unique deeds or transactions. It is very difficult to define this principle of comparability. Then in this case, the taxpayer, it's a more complex case, and the law says that is the kind of the last resort method, when comparability is perhaps not that important, but what is important is the method of distribution of value of profits. So that's a very complex science, and to say once and for all where is the border between comparability is difficult to say. We have to decide it in each specific case, but in each situation we may have a dialogue and to whether to decide it on the basis of comparability or the distribution of profits or profitability. So Russia so far is following the path of dialogue, that we should not spend a lot of value or wealth of funds on this simple method whenever we have other chance of. So you mean that these are the subjective approach, and the border is not yet very defined? How would you comment on this situation? Thank you. I agree with my colleague, and talking about the court experience of considering cases referring to Article 40, we know that it is has a very poor history for the tax authorities of this country, because very often we fail to take into account all the aspects of this transfer pricing in terms of the market value and market prices. And with the help of the High Arbitration Court, we have adopted a very robust approach to the application of all the methods that we enumerate here. So far, we have a definite freedom of choice, and this is my opinion, my personal opinion, and what I can see from this discussion. And then it's the opinion of the tax authorities. And I support the idea that in issues of transfer pricing, we should understand that this is a really unique chapter in the tax codes, and the stiff framework for administration perhaps is not fit for various tax monitoring and our checks on the tax payments. So we have to forecast the interrelationships between legal entities, and I consider that our practice with application or enforcement of Article 40, we recognize the independence of a wide circle of tax payers, and today with this article or sub-article 5.1, then we may deal with different procedures at the stage of checking this market value, and the law allows us to sign an agreement, and it's another illustration that this robust or stiff frameworks will not work as they used to work for the enforcement of Article 40. And as far as the exact definition of the market value, the conditions of delivery, and the terms and conditions of the agreement, of course we should not expect complete coincidence of one contract with another, and it's the obligation of the tax authorities and the tax service to define the differences between the standard situation and the particular situation, and we have to explain the situation of the taxpayer, and if we have enough reasons to support the position of the taxpayer, and if then we may suggest that some procedures for the rapprochement between the tax authorities and the taxpayers could be and should be found, because we will never arrive at 100% coincidence, because very often such cases could be brought to court, and companies may, the parties may suit each other. So that will be a possibility if the policy, it will depend on the policy of the federal tax authority. Thank you. Mikhail Evgenievich is one of the people who actively participated in the discussion of this law in the State Duma, and I, judging by the expression on his face, I would like to recognize him. Indeed, I wanted to pause a little bit before my intervention, but I have only one question which torment me. Are we discussing only one law, the last law which was adopted last year about the control of prices? Because it seems to me that we're discussing a system of tax oversight which exists elsewhere but not in this country. I agree with you that this is a very unusual law, and with great interest, and thank you, Wolfgang, when you said that the law repeats in many respects the OECD guidelines. This is really so. 1 month ago, I attended your lecture in the tax authorities, which a very interesting lecture where you described the comparability between the Russian law and the international practices, and all the differences which you enumerated actually are absent from the Russian law. Of course, I could talk a lot about the Russian law, about this particular law, because the law was carefully prepared, but finally the variation or the option of the law which was adopted, which that we had not discussed at all. And it's interesting that this law that now we have adopted, we read it with interest, because it's always an interesting reading for us. And so sometimes we wonder why this interpretation was adopted as a law. But that, of course, perhaps is an interesting feature of the Russian law adoption art. And in fact, the law that we have at the moment in this country, it's not a law actually as itself, but rather a search for a fair market value. It's rather a system which allows us to levy tax in any case. And we will say that a lot of subjectivism exists in the interpretation of comparability, and any of the 5 methods that are enumerated or listed in this law. By following each method, we would never say that we would arrive at the true solution of the problem. Of course, we have to watch along how the fire is burning or how water is flowing, but we would never say that this is the end of the process. So everybody who is present in this hall, you are familiar how a very simple law could be regulated for a very simple commodity as crude oil. So we may have here a lot of experts, and each expert would have its own version of the law. So very often this law is an attempt to show different scientific approaches, and it seems that different participants to this discussion has got its own opinion, and it's just an opportunity for us to prove how clever we are all. But still, we do see the differences between our opinion. But as a result of our discussion, the tax authority may give rise to certain response to some final version of the law, which would take into account the past discussion and which could be applied for the levies of these taxes. Perhaps Tatiana Vladimirovna knows better the court procedures, but if they would bring to the court a scientific thesis, two type of thesis, and even those people who are doctors in this field, they will take a lot of time to come to terms about the common understanding of this problem, because even if we have to talk about fair market values, even for the judge to arrive at the correct verdict or decision. Again, we know this Article 40 in 99% of cases would be appealed by the taxpayers, not because that was the issue of prices of values, but the appeal mostly was based on the court procedures, and this was the basis of their appeals. So what the court will do, the court would invite experts, and we know all the companies who may act as experts. KPMG, of course, we may say thank you because you have given us work for another 10 years, but the problem is not to give jobs to consultants, but we need very precise guidelines for taxation and for tax administration. So far, we do not know how to control this, and we do not know about the values, revenues, and these are the practical issues. As consultants, we give a lot of consultations to our clients, but this would be the position or the stand of myself or Svetlana or Dr. Logovich, and this will not be the position of the court. So it's just a case of the Russian roulette. And today we are talking about very huge sums of taxes. And my question is, should we speed up with that adoption of that law? Of course, I understand the importance of the control of prices, but our Kazakh colleagues perhaps are very correct when say that we should not be concerned about the price of various, for instance, bowling fixtures, but we are interested in oil, gas, and metals, and if we first accumulate the information about these basic commodities, and then we may proceed to go further, and then we will be able to go closer to introducing of controls or over services and other unique products. So today, to my mind, the law invites us to play this Russian roulette. Perhaps try to guess. I heard a question from you, what the court would do, what the tax authority will do. And of course, let us try to find, well, it's a kind of one-man orchestra situation. Of course, I have read attentively the section in the law, and each time I read it, you would always find something new. Why in my intervention I did not advise you to hurry up to the two parties in these disputes, because I do really see very difficulties in the solutions, and the material basis for this these procedures, for these settlement procedures, of course, would be a long way to go. But the courts, for the courts, it will take us 2 or 3 more years to somehow streamline this solution. Of course, I can see there a lot of unclear interpretations and terms. This is what all of you see this, and we discussed various these vague interpretations with our colleagues, and with this may be interpreted how we should consider various services, how we should consider Article 38 of this tax code. So to get rid of these issues, I believe that we, of course, are waiting for some clarification of the existing law. And I do not really understand, should we think or should we wait for the court resolutions and court settlements? Since today in this panel we have the organizers in the face of the federal tax authorities, we should discuss which kind of deeds or transactions we should control, because I do not have the clarity of mind when we have to control both expenses and revenues. But to control revenues, to control expenses, it's easy to understand. But how to control the entire process, the interaction between the buyer and the seller, this is a very difficult issue. And to say indeed, yes, we control the entire process, and without waiting for the entire volume of this interpretation, we should at least come to terms how we should understand this aspect of business.
So, if we do not have any understanding in this particular issue, then of course it's extremely difficult for us to move on towards the law enforcement. But as for the court, and the courts deal with very complex cases, and the definition of the price is one of the difficult issues indeed. But tariffs in the energy sector is a problem of no lesser significance. So we believe that professionals, experts can help. It's the only way to overcome the difficulty. As for what particular companies are going to act as experts, that's something to be discussed in order to avoid a situation when the same consultants, the same experts work at the stage when the tax auditing is being prepared, and then present the expert opinion in the process of court hearings. That's all I wish to say. Just a couple of words, if I may. As you understand, of course, over the past few months, together with Mikhail and other representatives of the business community and consultants, we have been working together. And it's the first time that I hear him describing the law in such a way. He says that according to this law, if the the tax base is not properly calculated, will have to be, the tax will have to be amended. The previous legislation did not stipulate that, and so that means we're at a new stage of legislation, and they will have a much wider range of the possibilities to reassess the consequences. Now, all this is a matter of legal experience and practice and technique, so to speak. Of course, we can talk about the law amendments, but we mostly should focus on the enforcement. Initially, I just wanted to say something but then decided to avoid it. But I would like to go back to it. So the legal practices and the assessment. No, don't we go beyond certain limits when we try to prescribe everything, when we want to provide definitions that cannot be treated in any other way or interpreted in any way that than we expect them to be interpreted. So it's impossible to arrive at this type of regulatory work. In this case, it will be impossible to carry out any economic activity without violating certain provisions. Just one example, the application of the method of comparable profitability when we assess the assets and compare them. It's a well understood method, often applied, and the Russian legislation clearly stipulates that when calculating assets, we should include only those assets which are indirectly or directly associated with the creation of a certain profitability or profit. So we looked at the explanations provided by the OECD, and we discovered that in the guidelines there is no direct indication that there is a rule like that in existence. So the legislator obviously had a very different purpose. He wanted to make sure that the tax authorities and the taxpayers know exactly what is included into the profitability range. So these rules of the indicators definition do not provide the taxpayers to calculate the profitability of the company, for example, which at present is in the process of refunding or in the process of the opening and commissioning of new production facilities. So I really would find this question quite difficult. The lawyers should interpret these provisions, I think, because they are the ones responsible for the drawing up of the laws, and that simply means we have to be extremely careful when formulating, when wording these most sensitive categories. And if we are planning to look for some sort of a fair result, a fair market price, then every party should have a permissible range within which it can act. As soon as we come across this very strict definition, then I'm afraid we are going to choose a wrong pathway. It will not make the law completely enforceable, and we cannot expect this law to reflect indeed the economic meaning and the essence that we would like to see in this law. And law and economy will have to digress from each other, I'm afraid. And so we're at the stage when the enforcement practice is just being accumulated, and it's probably the correct time to amend some of the provisions, and it's quite possible the amendments can be introduced through practical experience. I would like to add and to warn the participants of the discussion against one thing. So in the world there is a country which tried to regulate this range of market profitability, which is a very subjective type of calculation based on some database, comparable profitability, incomparable profitability. There is a lot of subjectivity in that. But nonetheless, many of the countries of the world try to understand if it is possible to have a simple formula. And one of the countries, Brazil, if you want to read, you can easily get this information. They have a simple formula. There is the profitability formula with a certain discount included, the maximum and the minimal price for import and export, below which one cannot go. And the formula is wonderful. The country solved the problem for itself because the taxpayers and the tax authorities just apply this particular formula and get a simple answer. But what is the problem they come across? Of course, Brazil works with major economic partners, and they exercise rather complex approaches. And in Russia, of course, we will come against across a similar problem, because the law will have to be amended, the law will have to be improved. Nobody says that the law is perfect. So here is what happened with Brazil. Up to a certain period in time, at the time of economic growth, before the economic crisis, the partners working with Brazil and knowing that there is this formula, sometimes paid a little bit more than they were expected in the terms of taxes. But at the time of economic crisis, Brazil came across a dilemma, because many of the American companies and other companies in the Brazilian market began to be very careful with money, and realized because of this formula, it was not profitable for them to be in the market of Brazil. So even a simple formula, plus minus 20% contained in our 40th article, for services, minus plus 20 market, it's not a market. It can be up to 200% in services, as we know. So on the one hand, we understand the criticism quite well, and I quite agree that there is a lot of things that are to be amended. But at the same time, I would like to call all of you up to not to try to create a simple formula for all prices, even for such a simple commodity as oil, and discussing it with Mikhail. Yes, we don't have a market of raw oil in some countries, and so it is impossible to settle the matter in any other way. Indicatives will have to be used, and we'll have to have a lot of discussions based on subjectivity very often, but the law enforcement practice, the practice of pricing, will allow taxpayers and tax authorities find mutual understanding, and in this case we can expect their opinions to coincide at some point, and the parties will reach a level of status quo, and it's a matter of enforcement, as I said. And I repeat once again, there are no simple and easy ways, and we cannot expect to see a simple price formula. It's a complex category, and I do believe that OECD supports us in that. And OECD was also revising certain recommendations and guidelines because the methods which previously were not that popular nowadays are quite often being applied. So it's a complex science indeed. It is a science, and we are mastering it. And I would like to ask a question then. Colleagues from Kazakhstan and Latvia about their judicial practice and enforcement practice. What is your experience in both of these fields? Do you have a microphone? Yeah, will you please introduce yourself? Good morning. I'm Ilya Chernobay. I represent the Tax Committee of Kazakhstan. Yes, we do have some positive practice, entirely positive, both for taxpayers and tax authorities. And Kazakhstan is specializing in oil exports, and most of our judicial disputes are connected with the transfer pricing in oil exports. And we went as far as the Supreme Court of Kazakhstan, and the Supreme Court ruled that not all the expenses that are included into the differential can be accepted as such as expenses. And the court proceeds from the following. In Kazakhstan, the transfer pricing legislation is not a part of the tax legislation. It's a different branch, and at the same time, when assessing revenues and expenses, we believe that there must be documentary proofs and evidence. And so such expenses as demurrage, for example, and operators commission, this is something that cannot be properly grounded. So it is allowed to include them into the differential if there are supporting documents. Is there a formula for oil in Kazakhstan? No, there is no oil price formula. Is there or not? No, for the taxation purposes. No, I'm a lawyer, and I mostly really work with the legal aspects rather than formulas. And of course, we want to know if there is any positive practice in this field. So Lydia will be able to talk about the formulas and prices. Silam, Latvia. No, I have a presentation, so could we have it on? Could I get the previous one? So, as for transfer pricing disputes in Latvia, I need to say that Latvia doesn't have that much experience in transfer pricing. And the first case was in the year 2006. Here is some information about the structure of the authority and the procedures for pleading against. So we have one level, which actually means that the decision of the tax inspector can be contested by the taxpayer, and the plea should go to the director of the tax control department, and then the director general and his decision rather can be appealed against in court. And in Latvia, it is also possible to address such an authority as the Assessment Commission for Transactions, independent authority established by the Cabinet of Ministers, and there are experts, tax authorities representatives, banks, and the Ministry of Finance and Economy are represented there. This institute was not that popular with the tax payers in the past, but quite recently a taxpayer addressed this particular commission, the Transaction Valuation Commission, on a matter of transfer pricing. This body functions, works not only on transfer pricing cases, but it also works on the evaluation of transactions in case of customs disputes. So as for the distribution and the distribution of the burden of proof between the administration and the taxpayer, we proceed from the substantive norms of the law. The law on the revenues and profits of the companies. It was said that in Russia adjustments can act both ways, and we discussed what should be controlled, expenses or revenues. We control taxable revenues. It means that when the taxpayer in Latvia has taxable revenue lower in Latvia simply because the transaction is below the market value, then the tax administration carries out the auditing of the transaction. Both the taxpayers and the tax administration need to follow the norms, the OECD norms, and the principles of the market price definition, the methods approved by the Cabinet of Ministers, and there is a special document pertaining to that, issued on the basis of the law that we have on the taxable income and revenue of the companies. So, in the process of auditing and control, the situation in which the taxpayers and the tax authorities are is well balanced, because both have to prove that they are right. What is the disadvantage of our legislation? We do not have any requirements concerning the transfer pricing documents. And it seems to me that the taxpayers are actually using this particular deficiency of our law, both in the process of contesting and proof.
So the taxpayer in this case may look for the optional way which suits him better. And if we talk about further steps and appealing, then the distribution of the proofs is mostly rested with the taxpayer, so he has to prove his correctness, and if he doesn't agree with the tax authorities, he should produce proofs, evidence of his case. Talking about transactions or deeds on transfer pricing are complicated and not well understood by third parties. This is true, of course, and here is one example which is shown here on the screen, and that example was appealed by High Court. And so far, although the High Court evoked this case, so far it has not come to the decision. And the credit was granted to a company based in Malta. In other countries, that was an interest-free credit. Correspondingly, the tax authorities believed were rather suspicious about that transaction, and a question was raised whether the taxpayer himself controlled these funds on the bank's accounts. Indeed, the credits were granted, but in much more smaller amounts, and there was a case that there was no collateral on the part of the borrower for these credits, and the terms and conditions of these credits were quite strange, and the tax authorities first asked the taxpayer himself how he calculated the market value of that deed. So the borrower could not provide any reliable information, and all what he could say was that such transactions between related entities in offering services may include interest rate of the loan extended. So this he claimed that the surcharge on these deeds, such as, for instance, administration or transportation or logistical deeds, these surcharges are high compared to other types of transactions. But there was no comparative analysis on this score. Besides, the bookkeepers could not produce an evidence that in this particular case there was the value on which this financial transaction was based, or all this service transaction was based. Therefore, just simply to mention the median interest rate was not sufficient for such an transaction or deed. So, such schema are very popular and are very frequently used by taxpayers in their evidence as their evidence. Perhaps I would like to hear whether the colleagues here encountered similar situations, on how they interpreted such situations. Did they pay attention to the views of the taxpayer? Besides, compared to the Republic of Kazakhstan, we do not have regulations or limits on the sources of information, which could be implied in case of comparative analysis. For instance, for appeals to the higher courts, in our country, it's a very difficult process, because you have to justify the situation, but you may use any source of information outside. Mostly we rely on Amadeus, or as far as financial transactions, we take median interest rate for the financial transactions between interbank deeds or transactions. And if we have comparable deeds, of course, then we may rely on such comparable transactions, and then we have simply to follow the principle of precedence. And in this particular case, I would agree with my colleagues here that in all transfer pricing cases there should be an open dialogue between the taxpayer and the tax authority, because the final decision of the tax authorities, even if it could be appealed, it should be based on very firm principles. And the International Convention provides for an opportunity for the taxpayer to appeal the tax sums levied on him in other countries, in foreign countries. So far in our country we did not have such cases, therefore I cannot share my appearance in this case. Latvia has recently joined the arbitration convention, the International Arbitration Convention, which foresees the existence of an international body in which such cases could be resolved, as disputes could be resolved if the two parties could not settle their concerns as far as the taxable income. In this case, of course, the parties may appeal to this high court, but in our experience we did not have such cases. In Latvia, we do not have a mutual agreement procedures between the taxpayer and the tax authorities, but such new legislation is underway, and it's in the pipeline in the second reading in the Parliament, and as soon as it would pass the third reading, and I believe it would be adopted by Parliament, so that would be another chance for the taxpayer to resolve such disputes between the tax authorities and the taxpayer, and this would be a good foundation for finding the true or fair market value. You raised an issue whether the tax authority to take into account the opinion of the taxpayer, and you provided a reply to this question. In this country, in Russia, we have a unique situation and unique practices associated that the transfer pricing is the duty of the central federal authority. And once again, within the federal tax authority, we have a venue of court audits, and the number of judicial cases is diminishing. I do not like to discuss here what kind of resolutions of disputes could be resolved here before court, but from the point of view of transfer pricing, this audit prior to court cases, it assumes a form when a higher tax authority audits or checks the activities of lower tax authority. And talking about transfer pricing, we of course have in mind the higher tax authority from this point of view. Of course, a dialogue between the taxpayer and the tax authority is a decisive factor from the point of finding the truth or compromise solution between the two parties. It would be very interesting to hear the opinion of the professionals, consultants present here. Perhaps you, Eugene, you may have your say on this matter. Thank you. Thank you very much. Indeed, our function of audits or control or supervision is entrusted to the federal authority, and this factor brings with it certain positive features. For instance, it helps us to prevent the taxpayer from the risk of avoiding some unbalanced solutions or decisions reached by the tax organs. And if we have a dispute as a result of audits, our legislation is worded in such a way that it gives no chances for the taxpayer to appeal to the higher court or body. So far we have a draft of the new law which may provide for a situation when the decision would be reached by the federal tax authority, then it will have no chances of appeals before the court. So what the taxpayer has to do in such a situation? Of course, we're interested to know what happens in other foreign countries. The taxpayer may make use as an option to avoid disputes to rely on the past history of disputes. Whenever the taxpayer tries to agree with the tax authority some agreement on the price, on the tax pricing, or the tax authority forces the taxpayer to pay additional sums or missing part of his payment, but it should not be it should not involve double taxation. And the arbitration procedure which was mentioned here should consider, and if we look at the statistical data on court cases of various taxation disputes, the share of such disputes amounts to 10 or 12% worldwide, and the taxpayers mostly try to resolve or settle these disputes with tax authorities before bringing the case to court. And there is a growing percentage of cases when these cases are brought to arbitration court. The only exception of cases is India. There you would find 50% of all cases decided or settled in court. So that's a very interesting precedent and a very interesting exception from the general rule. So we have different procedures for drafting various agreements, and this is a good sign that this new practice, which has become a commonplace nowadays, is very welcome, because such agreements, as a rule, is reached between the taxpayer and the Russian tax authority, federal tax authority, and the risk is the risk of double taxation whenever we have so-called trans-border transactions, two-side transactions or multi-side transactions. So I know that this is only in the plans of or the possibility of reaching such agreements, and as far as the mutually agreed procedures for transfer pricings, I do know of only a few cases when such foreign companies initiate such settlements with Russian federal tax authorities. In any way, today we see certain interest on the part of foreign taxpayers, which within the Article 20 are interested in settling such procedures if such a case would avoid double taxation. And although we still have a number of court cases on these taxation issues, and if we would find the truth in this transfer pricing, in my company we have a lawyer, and she says that I'm also looking for truth. And it's interesting that today you have one set of facts, but tomorrow you would consider another set of facts, and the truth seems to be a different truth. But indeed today the law does not allow us to have one single truth and to say what is the market value or the market price. It depends on the information, on the situation, and this may of course drastically affect the market value, and for the court this is a crucial issue to look and to reviews to consider all these facts and to be convinced that all the parties have correctly conveyed these facts, and if we will be looking for the new model of that law which would take care of all the aspects of these issues and it would resolve all our wishes. I don't know, perhaps Olga would comment on the OECD's guidelines. So what could be the proper model in the legislation in this country? But the draft that I have seen so far is much simpler, because it only contains the major principle and various algorithms for the tax authorities as a guide, but this is not an exact guide how to act in any particular situation. Thank you. Yes, indeed, we're all looking for the truth, but the truth is only a single and one. But today facts may change, and with respect to transfer pricing, of course, the taxpayer would provide us with a set of documents proving his point of view, and we shall consider this set of documents. And if we and of course, naturally, we would ask questions, because we believe there should be dialogue, dispute between the taxpayer and the tax collector, the tax authority, and the professional. Dialogue may not bring us to the truth, and we in this case take the case to the court. And what's the court's opinion would be if indeed new facts would be revealed at the court deliberations. So the new facts may always be very instrumental.
Oh yes, sure. Now, allow me to say a few words about the previous matter, because it seems to me that these are interrelated topics. Now, how many dialogues should the Federal Tax Authority have, and is the pre-trial settlement regulation is going to cover the transfer pricing sphere as well? Of course, the legislators today are not that open. They're not discussing this openly, so we can conclude that the transfer of competences into the hands of the tax authority simply indicates that the matter is extremely important, and the legislator does not envisage any need of for the taxpayer to address the Ministry of Finance or the head of the tax authority for the second time. So I don't think we should make the pre-trial procedures even more cumbersome, contrary to the trend that is going to be discussed within the framework of the next round table on all the tax audits, because after all, transfer pricing is not a full-fledged audit at all. But anyway, it seems to me that the second request for the submission of additional documents within the framework of the petition considered within the framework of this particular case can lead to the following. This or that administration might act subjectively, and it's very difficult to act objectively. It's very difficult to establish the level of objectivity. So it's all a matter of subjectivity after all, and we understand that it is very difficult to assess the market price. So I think that we should move over to courts, so within the framework of specific cases, if all the procedures are completed, and since the mechanism is clearly described, the preliminary procedures are all there, this indicates that the dialogue should be there, and the dialogue should continue until all the difficulties are resolved. But still, if the situation goes beyond what we have described and moves over to the level of the arbitrage court, what do we do with the proof? Can a taxpayer present new proof? That's an old story indeed. We come across this only too often. What should the court do about that? Should the court discuss and actually disclose all the information at the initial stage or not? So this is all associated closely to the tax audits, but I don't think that all this is permissible. Now, for 2 hours we have been saying that the situation is quite difficult indeed. So we can't say that you should do all of this at the stage of preliminary settlement, pre-trial settlement, that we understand that circumstances might vary. There can be different types of evidence. That's my personal opinion. We do not know what the practice is going to show. Sometimes a loyal interpretation of the law in favor of the taxpayer makes the taxpayer believe that the burden of proof is just on the tax authorities. No, it's not really so. We are mostly dealing with big companies, and I don't think they would wait, just sit and wait for the court procedures to finish, and they would not expect the burden of proof to be entirely on the tax authority. They would also like to present their documents. I think there has been a shift in that, and as to a certain extent, the burden of proof now is on the shoulders of the taxpayer, who should have a dialogue with the tax authorities. So I do believe that at the first stages of the enforcement of the law, the courts should accept additional documents. I think that's important. After all, we're in the process of learning. The courts are learning, the tax authorities are learning, and we will soon find out what extra documents are needed. But of course, the court should always raise the question of why a certain type of evidence has not been presented earlier. And very often we're talking about here the adversarial principle of the court proceedings, of the litigation, and so there must be a possibility of presenting new evidence and new documents. There will be no appeal against the decisions reached at the pre-trial stage. So we cannot limit ourselves to just a narrow set of documents and evidence and proof just at the initial stage. So if there is a situation that emerges of that particular type, if it is an extraordinary situation, and when the taxpayer behaves in a rather strange way, then it might happen that the court, in certain exceptional cases, rules that the taxpayer has ignored the requirements of the law, and in this case, since the taxpayer has not been able to prove the validity of the evidence, so he or she can lose in court. So we have less than 15 minutes left, and completing this part of our discussion, I would like to say that we really believe that we should not take these cases to court. And here is the example of United Kingdom, where the enforcement of the rules in the transfer pricing is quite extensive. They have been working on that for over 100 years, and they say that they win in 100% of cases. But just one case had been taken to court until now. So what can we say? That's what we should be aiming at, I believe. In the time left, we would like to talk about the agreement on pricing, new practice in Russia. When it is expected, the tax authority and the taxpayer to agree in advance about the formula of the price and the price itself and the method of the price calculation. So these negotiations are very difficult, very complex. The matter is difficult. They are professional indeed. And the legislator allows 6 months for that. And it's possible to extend the period to 9 months. In the United States, for example, the average time allocated for this type of coordination of work is 47 months, so 24 for unilateral, 24 months for unilateral agreements. So we have signals already. We know that the taxpayers are very much worried about that. They say that the tax authorities spend too much time on negotiating these matters. So, but even less than half a year after the enactment of the law, there are already these comments. So this type of an agreement is something quite new for us and very interesting. So I would like to ask Wolfgang to say a few words and say a few words about the practice abroad concerning the pricing agreements. So what is this process? What are these negotiations? How are the parties getting ready for the conclusion of these agreements? Is it administrative or a civil procedure?
That's a very good question, actually. Thank you. And it's a question, like very often in transfer pricing, with no just one answer.
Уже хорошо.
In the slide that you see at the moment here, I have laid out the typical APA process, Advanced Pricing Agreement process, which normally starts with a pre-filing meeting where the taxpayer and the tax authorities come together just to find out whether the case is appropriate for this procedure. The taxpayer in many countries can even be represented by his accountant and can therefore be anonymous, so he does not have to reveal too many information. Now, once there is an agreement that the case may be appropriate for an APA process, which is quite time-consuming, as we have heard, and in many countries the taxpayer has to pay a fee, like in Germany, 20,000 euros per case, and if in one multinational enterprise 10 subsidiaries are involved in 10 countries, where that means 200,000 euros. So then the taxpayer would file a formal request, a formal application, and I've now taken the Russian example here. The Federal Tax Service then needs to decide whether it refuses the case and does not accept it. It has, of course, to justify and provide reasons for the refusal. And at this stage already, the question arises whether the taxpayer can appeal or litigate if he feels where this is not justified and the Federal Tax Service should actually enter into an APA, can he go to court? And in my view, as far as I understand the Russian law, he can. Whether it helps is another question. The Federal Tax Service can, of course, also, and that is true in most other countries where this APA program is in place, ask the taxpayer to revise the application, to provide more documents, to maybe suggest another transfer pricing method, so the taxpayer should rework. Which means, and that is the green arrow going up again here, he has to file his request or application sometime later again. Now, after that, when the case has been accepted, which is the third option, there will be an evaluation and also then negotiation between the tax administration and the taxpayer as to what documents should be provided, what should be, for example, the appropriate transfer pricing method. If the method is decided, what should be the range of profits, for example, and so on. And after some time, and in Russia I heard it's 6 months, the Federal Tax Service has to come to a conclusion, which is actually then the agreement, the advance pricing agreement. And then the question arises, what legal status does this have? Is this a contractual agreement between the tax administration and the taxpayer that is binding on both parties? Or alternatively, in many other countries, including Germany, does this agreement only, so to say, present the basis for an act, for an administrative act, so the agreement would need to be implemented. And in Germany, for example, in many other countries, then the local tax office would implement the agreement by issuing a binding administrative act or a binding ruling. And that binding ruling, of course, can be appealed also, but it would not normally be done. It's just theory, because it is based on an agreement between the taxpayer and the tax administration. Now, this seems to be an easy case so far, but if we go for the next one, I've tried to put this in another slide. You see here two countries, because an APA normally involves, of course, two taxpayers, for example, a Russian parent company and its foreign subsidiary, so also two countries. These two taxpayers, parent and subsidiary, form the multinational enterprise, and they want to get certainty in regard of specific transactions and the transfer price. Now, the local tax office and, in our case here, country A, the parent company, the taxpayer, come to this APA agreement, and this can constitute, as we have heard, either a contractual agreement between the tax administration and the taxpayer. That is the case, for example, in the United States. They don't need an additional implementation act, and they don't actually issue a binding administrative act or ruling. But this case becomes more complicated. What is going on? It becomes more complicated when there is a bilateral APA, which means that another country is also involved, so that both competent authorities of country A and country B would need to negotiate this case. This would then be a mutual agreement based on the bilateral double tax treaty that is also considered an advanced pricing agreement, but needs to be implemented in each of these two countries, and by way either of a specific agreement between the tax administration and the taxpayer, or in other countries by issuing, again, an administrative act or a binding ruling. So the question is really about the definition of an advanced pricing agreement. And the taxpayer, once the agreement has been found, would not normally appeal. I think the appeal would only be relevant at the stage, back to that, at the stage where the tax administration refuses to accept the APA request or the APA application by the taxpayer.
Thank you, Wolfgang, very much. Before I ask Dmitry to comment and describe the Federal Tax Authority viewpoint, allow me to give the floor to Tatiana, who represents the Chamber of Consultants. So since time is limited, and I want the audience to take part in the discussion, is there anyone in the audience who wants to speak up? Yes, you wanted to come up with a comment. Use the microphone, please. Tatiana, the Chamber of Tax Consultants. We're members of the European Association. Vice President of the European Association is present here, Zdeněk Varš, and starting with the year 2007, first in Europe, and starting with 2011, we're invited to the tax forum in Asia. We can see that transfer pricing is discussed everywhere. So it's a topical issue for absolutely everybody. But our counterparts, professional communities and professional consultants have been able to reach much more success in that. They are discussing not just the OECD guidelines. We understand that these rules exist for the countries with common law and the continental law, and so the OECD cannot establish rules for us that can act just everywhere. So the professional community now is discussing the practice of the of APA, and everybody believes that these cases should not go to court. The professional community of Europe and Asia, and I must say that in Asia we were able to see what's happening in the developing countries. I do not know what's happening in Brazil, really. That's an open issue for me. Brazil obviously doesn't take part in this work, and it's mostly Asia and the Pacific region. Anyway, when we take part in their discussions, we can see that their problems are very similar to ours. They believe that they should improve the practice of APA, and everybody agrees that the recommendations of OECD are of priority importance as compared to the national legislation, and they are guidelines, and of course everybody can ride and drive at his own speed. And actually these guidelines just set the general rules in order to avoid incidents and accidents, and we would like everybody to listen to that, because no matter how often we are accused of protecting the interests of the taxpayers, we disagree with that, because we are not acting in the interests of anybody. Business is there not just to pay taxes, but to develop the economy and to build the budget. So we need to learn how to agree, how to build bridges, and we're most grateful to you because the dialogue here is constructive, and we are most willing to do everything possible for the APA in the absence of some of the elements of work could work properly in a proper way. So that's our position.
So the road is to sign this transfer pricing agreement. I can only quote here a few figures. I'm not going to go back into theory, but after the law was published and we started going through the major resolution of issues such as the issues, the practical issues, so to make our structure more transparent, and we are not novices in this business already, because we have published already a series of guidelines, including a special instructive letter which we published on our website on January 12th, and we tried to answer several issues raised by many of Russian taxpayers, and this stage, even before before the beginning of this year, we started several series of procedures, of pre-trial procedures. And what do we have? Where do we stand today? We have about 56 such negotiations and projects of agreements, and it covers more than 130 major taxpayers. from point of economic analysis, we have brought this disputes already to the official resolution points, and you know that there'll be a new tax fee levied, and we start these procedures more effectively, but you understand that you have to be an optimist in starting a new business. And when we started saying we need 6 months, of course this could be a kind of a dubious practice internationally speaking, because in the United States, as we heard, they need 24 months, and this is cannot be compared to 6 or even 18 months. Perhaps we will be the first in the world who would be compelled to sign these agreements within the scope prescribed by this legislation. In any way, we shall spend more time compared to our colleagues, because in this case we would have a couple of meetings, and including consultants. But so far we have different methods of negotiations. We of course discuss both technological and economic issues. We are through this stage, and we shall stay within this stage as long as the taxpayer would need, and it means how many meetings he would need. We would have the same number of meetings, and we're going to work so that this work would bring us to the logical conclusion. This is all what I could finalize, and we have published one more document as the first bylaw, the first guideline, the formats of this agreement that so far has been approved by the Ministry of Finance and registered with the Ministry of Justice. In other words, now we have the groundwork for this business, and there is no constraining factors for us to sign unilateral agreements for transfer pricing. Thank you. We're a little bit late with our agenda, therefore I'll be in a nutshell the major conclusions. The transfer pricing and overseeing this transfer pricing as a professional dialogue between the taxpayer and the tax authority. Second, here we repeated several times, we should not bring it, we should not go to court. We should learn how to agree on the pre-trial basis, and we have to trust each other. And I would like to thank everybody. Although the audience is not very big, but we have all our seats taken. Perhaps we shall ask to the organizers to continue this discussion in a big hall next year. And thank you very much, and thank you translators for the work done. Thank you. The meeting is adjourned.